Hey, what's up everybody? It is 12:27 p.m. September 16th, 2022. So today, pretty interesting. Got some really interesting things that I found in Genesis 2 that I just wanted to talk about. Are they absolutely definitive? I don't know. I'm going to let you be the judge, but they're very, they have a lot of bearing on the text. Let's say that, and you're going to see this. So I was working with my OSK, and I call it the OSK because it is Obery, Strong's, and King James together. So essentially it's an interlinear. It's an interlinear that was designed specifically for searching. Now, I haven't put a copy of this even up at the website yet because there were a lot of things that had to be done to it. It's missing verses in certain places because different texts had to be blended together. And when that happens, sometimes portions can get lost and you have to do it all manually, which is very difficult. But I'm going to explain a few things along with the promise that I'm going to put a version of this up at the site, and it'll be a lot like the exhaustive Obery biglyph root chart, wherein it is a document work in progress. Now let me explain to you a little bit about this OSK. So Obery, and you'll see on the screen. Let me I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you can see it really clearly. Maybe not that big. And see if I can inch it over or not. Maybe I'll just minimize, pull it that way a little bit. There we go. Now my screen isn't getting in the way, and I'll move this over there. Okay. So Obery, in the sense of, here you go, we're at, I'm sitting at Genesis, the verse in question, though there's many verses in question in Genesis chapter 2, it is a cornucopia of dubious terminology. Let me tell you. I'm at Genesis 2:21. Now what happened with this, when I got it mostly all together, I decided to do a word study just to start testing it out, seeing how well it works, and it works great. For word studies, it works really good. But there was a problem that I noticed immediately, and that is the way that in an interlinear, like you'll see on, like if you have eSword, or a lot of other programs have interlinears, what they'll do is, for the English, they'll either match it up with the Strong's code, or maybe they'll give you English up above and Hebrew beneath, or Greek. And it's a pretty weird matchup, and what you'll see is a lot of times they'll have to do part of the translation. A lot of times it's usually the English, because they'll keep the Hebrew or the Greek untouched, and they'll have to move the English around so that their translations match up with the source language, so they say. And of course, it's a little weird to read it like that. And what happens is it becomes sort of mechanical. All right, so when I'm looking at this, starting out doing that first word study, I'm noticing first off that the way that interlinear texts sort of have to match up the Obery word, which you'll see in black, with the Strong's number, which you see in red, and then in the bold blue here is the words from the King James as they're matched up to the corresponding terms, not in Hebrew here, in Obery, but these are the equivalent of the Hebrew words that you'll find in the Masoretic text. Okay, this was coded to the Westminster Leningrad Codex. which is, it's quite similar to the Masoretic text that was used for King James. The Masoretic text that was used for King James is oftentimes called the Mikraot Gedolot, but most of the time they'll just call it the Masoretic text. So there's basically the Masoretic text. You might hear it called Leningrad Codex. You might hear it called a number of things. The two big ones out there are basically that one Masoretic text, which is a little bit longer, has a little bit more material to it. And then you'll see the Masoretico-Critical. Now, the Masoretico-Critical is said to have been produced by a guy named Christian D. Ginsburg. And that is, it's a bit different. And it has a number of verses truncated, so on and so forth. So real quick on texts. What I was seeing when I started this word study is the way that the King James words were paired up with the Obri, they're really bad. It wasn't always correct. And I could see very readily how often these translators were inserting words for the prefixes or suffixes, sometimes affixed glyphs. They did not match up. They were not consistent with what I could see anywhere else. And here's one of the great advantages of this OSK, which is why I want to get it published as soon as possible so just anyone can use it to do these searches. You can do a search on any word in any form in Obri, and what you'll find is, let's say that word in that form appears 20 times in the text. You'll be able to go through and find like every single different kind of time. I'm going to give you a good example, okay? I was doing a word study on forms of ab. So ab is typically translated as father or fathers, okay? So there's one form of it is abutum. That's just the pronunciation, okay? And I would go in here and I would punch these things in, and I would punch in H1 and the hyphen because I want to see all of its forms in H1 because ab also appears in H2 and maybe H3 Aramaic. So it's important for me to punch those in. And what I would also do is I would put a space at the beginning because I don't want for any reason there to be some longer form of the word that get in the way. But I punch that in, I hit enter, and I got numbers 116, abutum, numbers 17:3. Okay, I can get every single occurrence of that word in that form that is entered into Strong's under H1. The entry of H being Hebrew 1, the very first entry in Strong's. Okay? So I'm going to go back real quick then to Genesis 2:21 and tell you a little bit about what was going on, which is why I made this video, or making this video. So what I did was I wanted to test some variations of words, because doing this study on abutum, there's 78 different variations of the simple root ab. It's a lot. That's a lot. And they can go into sort of families, which makes it a little easier, but there's a lot of different ways it occurs, variations. So I was finding that they want to oftentimes use completely different variations of this word, but they want to apply the same translation. And that's a problem. If it's a different word with different glyphs, it needs to be a different word. Or multiple words, depending, because that's part of the reason why there are prefixes and suffixes and even affixed glyphs, in the middle somewhere of Obri words, because they stand for things that we would have in our language like pronouns, prefixed words like conjunctions and things like that. And they could be referring to male, female, multiples, all kinds of stuff. And so I'm going through and I'm seeing how inconsistent all of this is, and it's just a mess. So I decide to go back to Genesis 1:1, start at the beginning, and just clean the language up in the sense that here I'm at Genesis 2:21. The first word in Oberi is u-yipal. U-yipal. Now, they had a lot more words in there in the English for u-yipal than what I'm seeing. I'm seeing who the u, typically and. It's basically the u adds and divides in a sense. And then you have the I, which is called yad in Hebrew, which tends to signify or signal a verb. And then you have that simple root pel, which usually has to do with falling. So, uyapal. So when I look at it, I'm like, okay, it's a verb. It's got the and at the front. It's that simple root of fell. And I changed it from the 4 or 5 words that they had in there to just and fell. So I'm doing that, and I get to Genesis chapter 2, a few verses before 21. And it strikes me. I don't know why it didn't strike me before, but I start thinking, you know, I'm in Genesis. I'm in the Bible here. I'm taking the time to clean up the problems in the interlinear portion, not the King James portion. The King James portion is below each interlinear verse, so anybody can see what the verse should read as in King James. But at this point in time, I'm going over and I'm filling in mechanically what it absolutely should read as, based on everything I've come to understand about Hebrew, but more importantly, Oberi, and how it works up to this point. So it starts striking me in Genesis 2, I'm thinking, I'm already in the Bible. I'm already changing some of these things and making them more correct and making it more mechanical in the interlinear section. And I don't have to change the King James. It's still there. It's fine. So why am I not taking the advantage I have of having this whole entire document open with all the occurrences of any given word all through the Old Testament and checking those occurrences as I go and seeing how they're translated and filling in the best translation based on all of the occurrences of any given word? So I start doing that. Well, let me tell you, it starts getting very interesting when you start doing that. Because what I can do is, when I enter any given word in the form that it appears in any given verse, for one thing, LibreOffice will tell me how many times that occurs, how many words. So I know what I'm looking at. I know how much I have to go over something. If I have a question, like let's say it's uyapal, that first word I brought up, it's H5307 in Strong's. One very simple way is if you just open up the website for a Blue Letter Bible and, you type in H5307, because Pel or Yipal, see, it's not even listed as Yipal, it's listed as Nepal. Anyways, it tells you right here, it's going to occur 434 times. But it's going to occur differently. It might be Nepal, it might be Yipal, it might be Epel, it might be Tepel. I'm not kidding. And then down here it tells you, well, it occurs 318 times as full, 25 times as cast down, 18. You can get a good idea. 434 times is a lot of times to look at something. But you can also punch it in exactly as it occurs. Like in this case, it occurs as Uyapel. We can start with Uyapel, even though that U is just going to be and. I can put that in. I'm going to put it in with the space. And I will put in its Strong's, 5307 dash. And I'm going to hit enter. Now down here it says selected 2 words, 12 characters. Uyapal. It should actually give me, unless I don't have this open all the way, all of them. Let me see here. 12 characters, so it's saying it's probably 6 times because they divide what you punch in and they consider these 2 words because of where the space is. So I'm assuming that they're saying it's occurring 6 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a lot more times than that. 10, 11, 12. It's a lot of times. I think they just ran out. Let me, I'm going to maximize this real quick. I don't know why it's doing this, because usually it'll tell me exactly how many times this occurs. Now, if you need to, you can go to this little find and replace, and it should tell you exactly how many times it's occurring. But it's going to show me. Either which way, it's going to show me. It's going to show me how many times it occurs in that exact form over the entire Old Testament. Because this is the entire Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi. It's not that many. There we go, back to Genesis 2:21. So it might have been a dozen. So that's the way it works. And I can look at every single time it appears as just Uyapal and see if it's consistent with that time. See if the other 11 examples are consistent with that one. Can do that with any word. And since I already know that typically when I see a U at the front, it might just be acting as an and, I can take that out and I can try just Yapel, with or without the Strong's code, H5307. So what that does is it gives me a very good picture in context of the way that any one of these terms, given terms, is used throughout all of those currently accepted 39 books called the Old Testament. So I'm starting to do this in Genesis 2. I get to Genesis 2:21, and I start seeing a few different terms that are a little weird. They're a little weird. I get to teridome right here. And now teridome, this word only appears twice, and both times it is translated as a sort of deep sleep. Now, I know the other passage. The other passage I actually went over in one of the episodes of the Aubrey Hours concerning the sunrise versus the sunset. So it might have been episode 11 or 12. It's in Genesis 15, I believe. And it says, and a deep sleep fell over Abraham. This whole passage, though, is, again, it's full of dubious terminology. So I start reducing, and I get to Redem, which is the most obvious triglyph, which it probably goes down to red. Red, typically, it can absolutely mean to descend. It can also mean, in a sense, to rule over, to... You could use it as oppress, depending. All right? But when I see it just as radum, it appears more than once, even a few times, as govern. And the thing is, I understand that when we're looking at an action or a verb in Obry, and we've got that T at the front, that T is usually indicating something that would be forward. So I don't know where this is all leading to, but I know that as it sits, as it's translated, it doesn't fit. So I put in to govern. I'm working through the other words. I get to ol, it's over. Adam, the atom. I get to this yishin, and slept. Now this does occur at least as yishin, so it's two Y's or yads with shin. It does occur that way like maybe about 5 more times. All those passages, a little weird. They're a little weird, and its root has really nothing to do with sleeping. I went over this word a year or two ago in another project I was working on, and I'm telling you, it does not really have, whether its root is ish or shin, much of anything to do with sleeping. And it's always bothered me. But for right now, okay, it appears 5, 6 times maybe as slept, and I thought I'll leave it alone. We go to uyakach and took. That's pretty normal. Here's the weird one. And if you're looking at the screen, you'll already see what I have filled in here. But in the King James and in almost every English translation you're going to find, you're going to get to this word. It's achat. And it's translated typically one or unity. Okay? Now, I'm going to punch it in real quick. It's H259. So let me put it into Blue Letter Bible, 259. And here's where it starts getting weird. Now, the word is achat, and it appears that way a number of times. And I'm just going to spell it out for you. So it would be, with English equivalents, because these glyphs are so very similar to most of English equivalent letters. A, H, which is usually pronounced more of a ch, instead of just a breathy h, okay? But the weird thing is, this and many other occurrences of this, it's not spelled with a D, it's spelled with a T. I don't know of anybody out there who could make the argument, because you can make the argument that in Masoretic texts, there are certain letters that are so similar that they could be mistaken. And one of those groups is the he, the ket, and the tav. Okay? The problem is, it should be a dalet. And the only glyph or letter you would mistake for the dalet's the resh. Those are the two that are close together. So you have no reason for this being mistaken. Now they do this with a couple of different numbers. They don't just do it with the number 1, because ahad with a D at the end is used mostly as the number 1. Just as we saw, this word is ahat with a T at the end, and it's H259. And just put in H259. That's not a T, that's a D. Ahad. And that makes a huge difference. It's a had. And now they do this with 2. And we can see in Genesis 1, day 1 is a had. Day 2 is shanim. But they also mix the word shittim with the T, not the N, shittim, in with shanim and call them both the number 2. That's a problem. That's not a little problem, that's a serious problem. We have a completely different word. So here's the thing. When I put in a hut, and I can put it in right now down below, what happens is I find some really odd things. So our first one, of course, starting at Genesis 2:21, and it was translated as 1. And you'll see why. For those of you that are watching the screen, you'll see how we got there. All right, so the next occurrence is Genesis 4:19. It is the verse about Lamech, who had these 2 wives. And it says, Lamech, unto him Shati, Shanim. Now, Nashim, which is usually women, but 2 is usually Shanim, more often than Shati. Shati oftentimes has to do with appointments, okay? And then we have Shem, which is usually named, but can also be placed, fixed, made firm. And then we have the word ahat, not ahad with a D, which is the normal, common one or united. And then they translate of the one is Oda, the name, and Ushem, and the name Eshanit, not Shanim or Shani it should be for the second. Should be Shanim or Shani. They have Shanit. Tseleh. Now Tseleh can be a number of things. And since our first 2 in that verse is dubious and it's not spelled the way that it normally should, we've got a weird verse. So let's try another verse. Now we have Genesis 8:13. It says, U'iyai, so and was be'achat. Are they saying in achat? Because that's what they're translating. They're saying in the first, which mechanically should be in 1. So the word actually could be bach, with the T at the end being, and I might have to explain a little bit this feminine cap, which I have in other videos, explaining the E at the end, this so-called feminine, not necessarily gender, but something that is a sort of a, makes something more generalized. That's what happens when you put E at the end of a thing, a place, or something. It makes it more general, less specific. But when you put it in the context of other things, you'll oftentimes see, and I'm not going to pretend like I have it figured out, but I can tell you there is a pattern of seeing this T put on top or in place of the feminine E. It's just, it is a pattern. It is a very clear, very provable pattern. You'll actually see it with when you have a definite feminine word that has that E at the end, this plural, what they call a plural, will typically be UT or T. Happens all the time. This could actually just be a word B-A-H, bach, with the T at the end, bachat, ushash. Okay, there's still a little bit of ambiguity going on there. So let's check another verse. Now we've got Genesis 11:1. Really, another one of those all of the first 12 chapters at least of the book of Genesis loaded down with dubious words, super dubious, questionable translations of those words. the whole way through. It is guys, it's a shit show. It's bad news how many changes have been made in just those first 12 chapters of Genesis. And you have to, this is all the foundations. And if somebody is changing the Bible the way that we look at it, understand it, see it, they're going to change a lot about the foundations. So it's not a weird thing. I'm just telling you. Genesis 11:1, story of tongues, languages, Tower of Babel. Now there's a guy in the 1800s, go figure, that wrote a book about the problems with language and the Hebrew language and the Tower of Babel. His name was, if I remember right, John Thompson. Now that surname has been connected with some strange characters. That's all I'm going to say. But, so I don't judge entirely by surname. But he does make some points in there that are valid concerning the way that people were able to communicate that were supposed to speak very different languages. It's very interesting. So anyways, in Genesis 11:1 it occurs, and they have it translated as one. But when you understand some of the points that Thompson is making concerning, you know, how much was language really changed and amongst who, and was it really the language, like the technical, mechanical language itself, or was it something different? Are we seeing something a little different? And he did address the language that we find in Genesis chapter 11. Try another verse. We go to, and we're still in Genesis 11:6. So let's move forward, because it is translated there as one. Let's go forward a little bit. Now we get to Genesis 12. Still a lot of dubious stuff going on by the time we're in Genesis 12, but it's evening out a little bit, because starting in Genesis 12, we get into the narrative of Abraham. Abraham coming out of Ur, which is light, the word light, Ur of the Kashdim. He comes out of there. He goes to a place called Haran in the land of Aram. And then he comes to Canaan after that. Now, there's a point where there was they say the translation says there was a famine in the land, and him and Sarah and everybody with them, they all go to Mitzrayim. And remember, Abraham's got a lot of people with him. I'm just throwing that in there. A lot of people with him. Anyways, so he says to Sarah, as according to most of our English translations, we understand it as him saying, "Say, I pray thee," this is Abraham speaking to Sarah, "Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee." He was worried about actually being killed, because not everybody in every nation was entirely lawless, and they were all very intelligent. He knew that she being very desirable and possibly the heir to a lot of what he had, and he was a man of substance. He had a lot. He had a lot. See my presentation, The Patriarchs, the Livestock, and the Land, which I am working on a revised version of that because of a few problems I saw with technical information. But in general, it is going to give you a very good idea of how wrong even the size of the land of Palestine and surrounding areas is for just what we see described in Abraham's possessions. But they're going into Mitzrayim. He asks her, as according to the English, "Please say you're my sister, so somebody doesn't kill me and try to take you, because you're very good looking." And there might have been more to it than that. Anyways, so what we have here is we have the word ahati. Now that Y at the end, or yad, is my. It denotes possession. But what we have before that is ahat. The exact same word that we just saw a few other times before this. sister. Go forward. Genesis 12:19. Lema, it's a question to ask. Amaret, said thou. Achati, she is my sister. There it is again. Same word. Now, Genesis 20, verse 2. And concerning Sarah again, of Shireh, or Sarah, his wife, Ahati, my sister. There it is again. And again, Genesis 20, verse 5. My sister, Ahati. And again, Genesis 20:12. My sister, Ahati. This is the word. Now we have it. It's not Ahati anymore. His sisters, Ahatu. It's the same word. It just has a different suffix, denoting either my in first person or now his in third person, Ahatu. We go again, Ahatu, his sister. Then we have it, Ahatem, their sister. Same root we saw in Genesis 2:21 that they're trying to tell us is one, when most of the time one is AHD, Ahad. Our sister, Ahatnu, NU, third person or first person, no, it'd be first person, sorry, or second person, first or second person. Our, new, our sister, Ahat, word, same word. And the thing is, I can do this all day. We're back to Ahati, my sister. You see how all of a sudden we're seeing how Ahat is overwhelmingly going to be translated as sister. And in many of the verses where it's translated as one, it is a bit dubious as far as, does that have to be one? And why is one oftentimes more often, way more often, Ahad than Ahat? And I start wondering if somebody is pulling my leg. Now we have her sister. And now here's why. Bear with me here for a second, and then we'll get back to Genesis 2:21. Because it's just bizarre, that's why. I don't have, again, I'm telling you, I don't have answers, but this is really important, what you're going to see here. It's just crazy. And I hope what it's going to do, it's going to illustrate to you the kind of work that needs to go into understanding the language as it was originally penned, as it was originally understood. Funny thing. So, the word for brother, the word that is translated brother, I'm going to go back to the A's here. AH. AH. 629 times. Ach, or oftentimes Achi, my brother. Ahu, his brother. Achem, their brother. Ach. A-H. Now the word that we just looked at was A-H-T. And we know that there is a huge overwhelming pattern of a feminine, which oftentimes would have an E at the end being capped with a T, especially if you have to put on an additional suffix like the Y, my sister. It wouldn't be A-H-E-Y. It would have a T as a sort of cap on that E. Don't ask me why. I'm just telling you that's the way it overwhelmingly appears. So the word for brother, A-H, ah. Now, it would make all the sense in the world if the word for sister was actually A-H-E, ah-he, capped with a T when it needs some other sort of suffix or when it appears in some various sorts of contexts. It can have that T on it. So I'm going to give you a good, clear, easy example of what I'm saying. Now, I just showed you brother, A-H, brother. Let's do this with male and female. The word for male that we're normally going to see is Aish. A-Y-sh. Or shin. Sh. It's a glyph. A-Y-sh. So the word for woman is going to drop the middle Y and just be Asha with that feminine E at the end. I'll show you. This is the word for woman. Woman or wife. Asha. Right here, H802, Asha, woman. Right again, Asha, woman. See how that works? Asha, woman. All right. So if you just replace that feminine E with a T, what do we got? Ashat, wife. Wife, woman. They are interchangeable. When you see Asha or Ashat, it means woman or wife. Like, especially if it's possessive. His woman, his wife. Because a man's woman is his wife. We're putting baggage of English terminology and the sort of way we've been programmed. But woman, wife, okay? Same thing. So we're seeing the same thing. The male gender, Aish, A-Y, sh. The female gender equivalent but feminine, A, sh, with that E at the end, that feminine E at the end. Okay, but when we have it in certain contexts, they put that T at the end, ashet. We can see it right here over and over and over and over and over again. Wife, wife, woman, wife, woman, woman, wife. See? Now, the first thing that makes me think of is how the word bet, B-T, is translated as daughter, but benut is translated as daughter. You see, ben is the word for son or children in Oberi. But when we see benut, bene, it works for daughter very well. So there's definitely a pattern here of this assigning something and it being male, I guess, as that's its default. And we can put on this E at the end to make it female, which oftentimes gets this T cap. Kind of weird, right? Just saying. So there is tons of precedence for this pattern and for us to understand a lot of words like that. Their default is typically male, and if we put that E or that T cap on the end, it's female. So let's jump back. There's one more point I want to make about the word for brother, A-H. I have done not a word study, but I have filled in the table in the Exhaustive Oberi Biglyphs Roots chart for it. And many other words that have this H or ach in it. And what would appear to be saying, if you have ach or ahi, my brother, is you have the A being something like priority, in a sense, or self. When somebody is speaking in first person, they'll use the A at the front to refer to self. It augments a word, in a sense, at the front, being priority. Now, when you see the H across the board has to oftentimes do with linking, like chains and linking. In fact, there's a word that's just two H's, kach, that actually is translated very well as like a link or chains. Has everything to do with link. So if you're using the word ach, the A being something very strong, very priority, and oftentimes referring to self, with the H having to do with linking, you could see how ach would be brother. Because your brother or your sibling is the closest thing genetically to you. They really are. If you only had one sibling, they would be the closest genetic thing to you that exists. Thus, it makes all the sense in the world that these glyphs are used for brother or maybe sister. Now, does that mean... Does it always mean that we're talking about from the same mother and the same father? I don't know. It's because it's used a few times in the context of Abraham and Sarah. But I would think, based on the glyphs and what the glyphs seem to point to, as far as brother goes, it would point to something similar as far as sister. A person, a being that is closer in genetics and makeup to you than anyone else. So when I go and I gather all this information that I just went over in this video together, and then I apply what's more common for a hot in this verse, based on the search I just did, instead of translating it as King James and every other translation out there does, as one of his ribs, I end up and took, and if you don't have an E at the front, which is like the, it's like the, making it a proper, I'm sorry, it's not proper, I forgot. Then you could just assume a common noun in there, and took sister or a sister from tsel otiu, from his side, because I'm not too sure about rib. And when you look into this word, tsal has a lot to do with shadow. Very similar to someone. In fact, forms of tsal are used in Genesis 2 concerning the sculpting of something. So his sides, maybe, but maybe a lot of it had to do with his characteristics. From tsal otiu. U yitsager, maybe enclosed, maybe. Besher, flesh, possibly. Tahatane, instead. That's a little dubious too. But one thing, and this is very much the thrust of what I'm trying to say here, and I want to use this again as an illustration of how much work needs to be done to the text so that we properly understand the text. If Yahweh didn't find, as most translations put it, a helpmeet, which isn't great, a better translation based on the words is one to sort of stand and minister. Not a slave, not a servant, but one who was distinct but extremely close, who would be a completion of him. By himself, he wasn't complete. He just wasn't whole. He needed someone to fill a role in his emotions, his inner being, in his mind, in his work, his life. If this being, this person, was taken from him, and let's say tsel otiu has more to do with certain characteristics of him instead of a rib, a number of things about him, certain aspects, and I'm not saying he was androgynous. Don't get me wrong there. I'm not even suggesting that. In a sense, like a shadow. This is not to minimize woman in a way of, for the sake of minimizing woman whatsoever. But just like in Obri, if Ashe is the feminine of Aish, the masculine, because it's quite similar, but it's that E at the end. What does the E at the end do with other nouns? It generalizes it in the sense of softening it. That's important. So I would simply ask you, and you can make up your own mind about this, and I hope that as I'm able to start publishing these OSKs, and maybe once a month, or as I get another chapter a little better, we'll publish like a newer version of it, that you guys will start doing some of these searches yourself. You'll start seeing some of these things on your own. So I'll let you come to your own conclusion whether a hut that doesn't fit with all the other occurrences of ahad should actually be one in Genesis 2:21, and we should look at it as the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs. Or should we look at it in the way that most harmonizes with the rest of the Old Testament, where it says that Yahweh, Elohim, or God, took or extracted from his being, his characteristics, a sister, in the sense that she would be at that time the closest genetic, mental, physical link to him that existed. I've given you evidence to show you that sister works just fine, and that one maybe could work, because there's a lot of instances where they've changed things on us, where the nouns that they put in or the verbs that they put in, they work in the context of those verses, but they're not correct. We want to find out what the real story is here, what's really going on here. So this, I hope, will serve simply as an example of how the text has been changed, how we can use tools like the OSK. I promise I will publish it as it stands, with the caveat that it's, of course, not finished within the next week, so that anybody can use it. It's a big file, though. Even as a PDF, it's a big file. I haven't tried it on a browser yet, so I don't know if there's any lag, but it's a big file. But it needs to be one file instead of 39 different books, which was suggested. It's a good suggestion, but you want to be able to search through the entire Old Testament. All you got to do is answer for yourself based on what you've seen, not just in this video. If this is like your first time seeing a video from me about language and language in the Bible and all that stuff, you're probably going to be like, I don't know. But hopefully I've shown you, even in this video, if you haven't seen all the other language videos, the presentations, the Obri hours, the Bible in Obri, all of that stuff, that there's so much precedence for these new and I think better interpretations. I hope at least in the context of this video you'll agree, probably, most likely, a far better interpretation here for that word instead of one is sister, in the sense of a female, not a male, a female that is closer in genetic makeup to the source, the atom, than anyone else who existed. And with that, I finished almost 5 minutes before an hour. I'll see you next time. And by the way, I want to thank everybody for watching the criminal justice series, because they are my experiences. I think there's a lot to be learned from them. And there's something that I can kind of peel out in less time than some of these things. But they're not just something I'm making just to make. I wouldn't just do that. Everything I think is important, so thanks for everybody who watches those. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you again soon. Take care.